Well,
Yeah, that's great. And I get a lot of great information from listeners who send me emails all the time, not only with questions, but they send me leads on new information from their areas of expertise. And so it's really kind of my job is to pull it together for everybody and to synthesize it down into some, elementary points. And specific to the machine at CERN, we're talking about a ring-based particle accelerator that's 27 kilometers long that accelerates subatomic particles, protons, electrons, ions of lead, to near the speed of light. And they do that by creating what are called particle beams. And these beams operate, there's two of them that operate in opposing directions. They circulate within a pipe or a tube 27 kilometers long, 300 feet underground in Switzerland. It actually crosses the border into France. And by circulating those particles at near the speed of light, they are able to, at certain points called detector locations, to cross these two opposing streams of particles so that they collide into one another. And the purpose of the collision is to both yield energy, but also that is what their goal is, to discover new quantum particles, to discover really the elements of the universe, and in their parlance, recreating the Big Bang. But their also stated goal that a lot of people have associated my name with is the opening of a interdimensional portal. That sounds very science fiction, but it comes right out of CERN's public relations department, their press releases. They openly say they are seeking interdimensional gateways. That is their primary objective. All of the energy, all of the power, all of the technology, all of the focused, brilliant minds at CERN all have one goal, and that's to open a stable, interdimensional portal into another dimension for the purpose of allowing other entities, information, and resources to move from another dimension into our dimension. And we'll get into some of the more stated reasons and specifics on that. But yes, it is absolutely the goal, both at the level of the Large Hadron Collider, which I kind of call the macro scale because of the size of the machine, even though they're working at the quantum level. But there's a direct correlation to another topic, and that's a quantum computer that operates at the quantum level, manufactured by D-Wave Corporation. These two topics are linked to the same purpose. Definitely. I mean, you can go back to the Nazi Bell Project, and they also were circulating red mercury at high speed in opposing directions and colliding, and they were generating synchrotron energies, which killed a lot of their researchers in the initial phases. Synchrotron energies are X-rays and gamma rays, and killed these scientists. And it's the same on a very small scale. It's the same theory and practice in physics as you see at CERN today. So CERN is an outgrowth of that research, and the Nazi research was an outgrowth of Tesla's work. They're operating under a very strong delusion. They've been deceived, and they actually are believing that the work that they're doing is beneficial to mankind as a whole. And I want to underscore that by saying I don't have any ill will towards anyone that's involved in this research. I feel sorry for them because they've been deceived. However, understanding that, their thinking is that they are believing the grand old lie put forth by Satan himself in the Garden of Eden, that ye shall be as gods. They're seeking immortality. They believe the information, the entities, the resources that will be coming through will help them achieve that goal, that ultimate goal of defeating death. And if you look at the venture capital money in Silicon Valley in California, where that money's going to, it's going to that same goal of defeating death. The elite, the moneyed, the scientific world is all pushing towards the direction of defeating death, achieving immortality, and they believe by opening this portal, they will gain information, knowledge, and power to achieve that goal. Well, let's go to CERN, and then because this is the introduction to the show, I want to kind of hit some of the table of contents items. But we have a new name for the Large Hadron Collider. We have new technology being combined with the ring-based accelerator. We also have a new energy level that I'm going to cite, which is not public yet. I'd also like to touch on, in terms of artificial intelligence, the grand game that's being played, a psychological operation. And this does tie to CERN. It really does. But we're going to get into quantum computers and psychological operations. And this ties to something that you two have covered quite a bit, and it goes back to urban resolve and Jade Helm and artificial intelligence being tied into those operations. So this is an area where you'll be able to add to as well. In what I'm just sort of hitting the surface of is the psychological operations that are conducted by an artificially intelligent, sentient computer system. And that is made by D-Wave, and I will present a new model number for D-Wave's computer that is not public information. Well, I think we're coming up on a break pretty soon, so I'll make this real short for you. But we're also going to touch a little bit on the Mandela effect, what I call the Mandela portals.
Okay.
And this is something that has been lambasted and a lot of people have made fun of. But whether it's true or not, whether what we're seeing in terms of changes are real or not, isn't the issue. I want to put it in the greater context of the psychological operation that's going on right now. We're being played as a populace. We're being played. And that's where I'd kind of like to go tonight. Well, okay, real quick, I'll give you some things that we can pick up on the other side with. There's a new name for the Large Hadron Collider because they're combining two different types of technologies. We have right now in the Large Hadron Collider, as I said, the ring-based particle accelerator, accelerating particles in opposite directions in circles. They are combining that with a linear accelerator, which means it's accelerating particles in a straight line. That's called the Awake experiment. That uses plasma and electrons. It's a plasma wake field accelerator. The key point here that we'll pick up on in a minute is the fact that two machines are going to be combined. The linear accelerator, Awake, is 1,000 times more powerful than the much larger 27-kilometer machine. The Awake is only 30 meters in length. And I'll give you on the other side the power level that they're going to achieve when they combine the two machines. This is a whole new world of physics. In fact, they even term it as ridiculous physics because they don't even know what they're getting into once they achieve the power level that I'm going to disclose in another few minutes here. Essentially, they have identified a power level that they need to achieve and able to open this dimensional portal. Now, we're talking about quantum physics. We're talking about at the quantum level. And we're focused on particles called strangelets. These are quarks bound by a force called a gluon force. It takes a certain amount of power to break that force, and they've identified that power level. In order to get there, they need more powerful accelerators. The ring-based accelerators, they are limited by the power of their superconducting magnets. And in order to reach the threshold that they need to open that portal, they need a linear accelerator with an entirely different form of technology to accelerate particles. What we're talking about here is taking electrons from one of the circular pathways, moving it near the speed of light, and feeding it into a straight line linear accelerator, sort of like taking a cartridge and a bullet, and feeding it into the breech of a cannon coming in the backside of this linear accelerator with pre-accelerated particles. Then they're going to accelerate them again within this 30-meter accelerator. By doing that, they're going to jump 1,000 times in their ability, in their power, in their speed that they can achieve with these bullets. More specifically, they're getting to not exceeding the speed of light, but they're increasing the mass, what's called the resting mass and the center of mass of the accelerated particles. Think of it this way. You take a bullet and you accelerate it. The faster it moves, the heavier it gets. It gains in mass. So you're not only moving faster, but you're moving with heavier particles, and then you collide with a target. In this case, they're not colliding with other spinning or rotating particles. They're actually going to a fixed target, and the fixed target will be composed of these strangelets, the most powerful explosive in the known universe. And they're going to detonate that. And when they detonate that, it opens the portal. Yes, in the world of particle physics, you're increasing the inherent mass, what they call the center of mass energy.
Okay.
The portal will be open and stabilized as a fixed portal long enough to allow the opening of the abyss, the bottomless pit, and allowing the locust army of demons to spill forth from that bottomless pit. And therefore it requires a certain stability of that opening. That is controlled, that is governed by the adiabatic quantum computer, the quantum computer made by D-Wave, and I will in a few minutes give you the new model number for that. But this has to do with an opening that is stabilized and allowing demonic entities to enter our realm, to enter our world. To answer your other question, will they be successful? Yes, according to prophecy, according to the Bible, the book of Revelation. Yes, indeed, they will be successful. But this isn't for the purpose of fear-mongering. This is not to cause people to go running in the streets, saying, the sky is falling, CERN's going to be successful. First of all, people wouldn't even know what you're talking about if you mention the word CERN. But the point here is that this is God's plan. And God's in control of all of this. Yeah, the scientists, everybody who's running around doing this research, and those evil ones that are behind it and pushing forth this agenda, they have but a short time, and Satan has but a short time. We know, if we follow Scripture, we know how the story plays out. The unfortunate thing is there are a lot of people that will suffer because of this successful opening of the bottomless pit. And this serves as a warning. This is the bigger sort of pulling back from the details of our topic tonight as to what motivates myself, what drives me to bring forth information from physics and the greater world of science, and that is to show proof to people that the world is being changed. It's being changed to the negative direction, to look at the facts, look at the figures. Everything that I present is factual, and I bring it either from the Bible or from the world of science in the form of their published papers. So what we're talking about here is evidence of evil. You can look at the Large Hadron Collider. You can look at the other forms of science that we're going to be going into tonight and see the facts and see the evidence and say, well, I guess I have a choice. I either get to go with the light, go to Jesus Christ, go to God, or I can go the other direction, which is to Satan. There are only two directions in life. And I sound like I'm preaching, but this is what drives me. This is my mission field. I'm taking science and using it as facts and as evidence to bring people to Jesus Christ. Mm. And there is the crossover connection between CERN and D-Wave. And I don't believe anyone else out there has made the connection that I made almost 2 years ago publicly. And that sort of got me in trouble with D-Wave, and they sent some of their guys to talk to me. But that's another footnote in history. But the point is, the key, I haven't been able, and you guys are excellent students of Scripture, can you define from Scripture or find in Scripture an actual tangible definition to the word key? Because I haven't been able to, and that's why I went to quantum computing and to codes to look for that answer. So I'm sort of throwing the question to you. And so I take it to maybe a more modern definition. And this gets into cryptography and cryptology, the study of codes, the using of codes. Because I began to look at why would they use a quantum computer to open parallel dimensional portals. Because later on in my website, as you scroll down, you'll see that I'm quoting their chief technology officer, Gordy Rose, and we'll get into some of those quotes in a minute. And I appreciate you giving me 3 hours tonight because there is a lot to cover. But they used that machine, that adiabatic quantum computer, which I first started looking at in 2003. Their stated goal was to break a code. It's called Shor's Algorithm 2048. That's a whole page of numbers, and it's to break it down to its prime numbers, its prime factors. It would take thousands of years for a even transistor-based quantum computer to break that code. But they broke the code with the adiabatic quantum computer. And I began looking more deeply into this, and I realized what the key was. The key was comprised of bits, computer coding. And in order to break that code, they had to have a certain number of qubits. Now, qubits replace transistors. Qubits are what are used in place of transistors for this adiabatic quantum computer. You had to have an equal number of qubits in the computer to break the code, to break the key, to open the bottomless pit. That information is only privy to one model computer. The actual key is the 4096. Now, they've only talked about a certain number of models of computers. They started back in 2005 and released a computer with 4 qubits, and then in 2006 it was 16 qubits. In 2007 it was 28 qubits. In 2010 they jumped to 128 qubits, and they sold that to USC and Lockheed. It's called the D-Wave 1. And then in 2013 they sold a model 512, that's 512 qubits, to Google and NSA. They called that the D-Wave 2. Now they have the 2X, which is over 1,000 qubits. It's 1,024 qubits. They also have one that they've publicly talked about, which is the 2048, the 2,048 qubits. In the mathematical progression of the model numbers, today we now, and they've not made this public, but it is the 4096. That's the number of qubits in the computer, and that's the number of bits in the key. The key is made up of 4,096 bits. They need to crunch those numbers in order to unlock the bottomless pit. Because the correlation's been made by myself and many others, the Large Hadron Collider to being a modern version of the Tower of Babel, which is theorized to have been, attempting to reach to heaven or to, open portals into other dimensions. And the languages were confused by God as punishment for doing this and the destruction of the Tower of Babel at that time. The language, I believe, the code, more specifically, is God-given, because he gives that to the angel, who is then cast from heaven down to earth and provides the key to open the bottomless pit. Now, that scenario has not occurred yet in the timeline.
Okay.
That's a future date.
All right.
But that key was created, that code was created by God, but it takes this computer to break it.
Thing. Okay.
Right, because as you know, in codes, it is called a key to write the message and decode the message, quite literally. And this is part of where I went to the RSA encryption and looked at the correlation of RSA encryption to Shor's algorithm. If people want to type that into Google, you'll see the RSA encryption, which is used worldwide for secret transmissions and communications, is based on Shor's algorithm, which was the primary purpose for building this quantum computer in the first place, was to break Shor's algorithm. They've already done that. Now they know, as a further development, that they can break the key, the code to the bottomless pit. They not only have the power, which is I'm going to cite here in just a moment, but they also have the ability to read the code once they collide with the strangelets. They're going to achieve 20 peta-electron volts. I'm going to let you jump in here, and I'll define that a little more, but that's the power they're going to achieve is 20 peta-electron volts.
Okay.
It's utter nonsense.
All right.
I'll give you a reason for that. The statue of Shiva is in a public area. Certainly, this is a hit-and-run event in which these young kids, it appears to me, got in before they were noticed, performed their little ritual, and got out before they were caught. But it is a public area, so it's not a big deal. If there was really a ritual that was going to be performed, it would be done at the Gothard Tunnel.
Okay. All right.
I'm making a joke there. I'm sorry.
Well,
we're getting into that, the Gothard Tunnel. But the point is, it would be done behind closed doors. It would be done underground. And if you look at the person who supposedly is holding a knife, this person is wearing running shoes. I mean, give me a break. Now, this is all contrived nonsense. The combining of the machines is resulting, as we said, in power levels up into the quadrillions. So just to give that a little bit of perspective, back in October of last year, CERN was operating at a different power level in the trillions called tera-electron volts. Presently, they're still operating at approximately 13 tera-electron volts as they were back in October. But I bring up October because it was at that time that I announced that CERN, the ring-based collider, actually had the capability of hitting into the quadrillions, moving from tera-electron volts into peta-electron volts. And I stated that I believed that before the end of last year, they would hit 1.15 quadrillion peta-electron volts. And CERN, 3 weeks later, came out with a press release saying, yes, we did have a spike. We did hit 1.14 peta-electron volts. Now, the reason that I bring that up is so that you understand the machine has a higher capacity for power than what they are operating at right now with the one machine. When they go and combine both machines, as I said earlier, they're going to achieve a 1,000-fold increase. They're going to move to 20 peta-electron volts. Now, that's something that even 10 years ago was really just science fiction for the physicists themselves. But it's the advent of this linear accelerator and the use of plasma technology that it allows them to achieve the power level they need for opening this portal. Now, part of what I also want to reveal is the new name. When they combine these two machines, it's going to be called the I might back up just a little bit here. It's the VHEEP, and this is the Very High Energy Electron Proton Accelerator. Now, that's a mouthful, and they probably, you won't hear many people using that name. But in the world of physics, that's what it's really called, is the VHEEP. And it isn't necessary for people to know that, but I just want people to understand that I am doing the research within their own world and extracting that and presenting it to you as fact. So that's one aspect of it. The other part that we can move into, since you did bring up this video and people are worried about, is this real, is this factual, is this all made up? And as I said, that particular incident, supposed occult ceremony or ritual was really nonsense. But the Goddard Tunnel ceremony was purely satanic.
Oh, yeah.
And we can break that down a little if you want. But the one that I'd like to step into that's on my website that you're following along with me is the Mandela portals, because that's really out there in the popular, conversation and has been for about 3 months now.
Okay.
So that'll lead us into some quotes from D-Wave Corporation, and it will show the relevance of the quantum computer to D-Wave again, or from D-Wave to the Large Hadron Collider, but it's really going to show you their thinking, their motivations for building that quantum computer that are parallel to the motivations at CERN. The crossovers are profound.
I'm going to tell you a little bit about quantum computers and why people care so much about them. There are literally tens of thousands of some of the brightest people in the world today trying to build these machines and understand them. And I'm going to tell you why. In my last 15 years of working on this type of stuff, I found that scientists divide up into two categories of zealots about this field. The first half are people who are absolutely entranced by the physics of these things. This quote is from a respectable scientist, in fact, one of the founders of this field, that may look a little strange to you who don't follow theoretical physics, but there is a very clear prediction that our most successful theory of nature makes, and that is that there are an enormous number, mind-bogglingly large number, of parallel realities, as real as this one, that have different consistent histories. So imagine a world where all of the laws of physics as we know them are obeyed, but different decisions were made along the way. Different decisions at the level of tiny microscopic particles, different decisions all the way up to what you chose to eat for lunch, and whether you chose to come to this session or not. Quantum mechanics makes a very specific prediction that all of those are as real as the thing that you remember. And this is bizarre, because we don't see those other things. But science has reached the point now where we can build machines that exploit those other worlds. And quantum computers are perhaps the most exciting of all of these that we have within, or almost within our grasp right now. So people from a physics background love this. They want to understand the world. They want to understand the universe, how it all works. There's another type of person who tends to come from the computer science side that's like, yeah, okay, that's all great. But there's a different thing going on here, which is just as exciting, if not more, and that these machines that supposedly can do this wild stuff, let's forget about how they work, if you could build one, could solve problems that you could never, ever solve with any computer of the sort that we built. If you took every single atom of silicon in the world and made the most sophisticated conventional Intel-style processor that you could build, there are problems we know of that I could write down on a sheet of paper that you could never, ever, ever solve with that thing, that you could with this kind of machine. So that's very exciting. Humans use tools to do things. If you give humans a new kind of tool that can do things that you couldn't otherwise do, imagine the possibilities. So you may think, well, this is all fine and dandy, but aren't these things in the realm of theory and speculation kind of in the same regime as other futuristic things you may have heard of which may be allowed by the laws of physics but aren't here yet? That's not true. There are, in fact, many of these machines deployed now in openly available research centers following the model that was used to introduce supercomputers to the world. They're too big and ornery and difficult to operate to put in your home, too expensive also, but you can give them to a place which will manage them as a shared resource that will offer that service to the world. And there are two of these now. One of them is at the University of Southern California. And this analogy with flight, I think, is an interesting one. So a horse can beat, or could beat, the initial flight of the Wright brothers' flight in speed. But a plane is not a faster horse. A plane is a different kind of machine. The plane takes advantage of another resource that nature gives us, this third dimension, in order to do something that matters to people better than you could do with any horse. It doesn't matter how fast you make a horse, it will never fly, at least the kinds of horses that we know about. So these types of computers now are being thought of in the same way. They're not terrifically powerful yet, but they're doing something completely different than what your computer does. And that thing is like flight. It gives these computers access to these new resources, maybe you could call them parallel universes, in order to do something that you couldn't otherwise do. And that's not the only one. In fact, the one I'm going to come back to and talk to in the context of the story that I'm wrapping this in was recently installed at NASA. And Google was the primary interested party that pulled this whole thing together. And this one is really exciting to me, because what they're going to do is apply this machine to an area that I think is fundamentally important. It's a crux of our future as humans, and that's, can we build machines like us? So, building machines like us might be possible. I certainly believe it is. I might be wrong. But what I do know is that the types of approaches that people are taking now to build intelligent machines benefit immensely from what this machine that we've built does best. So what this center is about is applying this beautiful new computational idea in the service of trying to make intelligent machines. Now, I can't think of anything personally any cooler than trying to use quantum computers to build intelligent machines, so this is very exciting to me. Steve Jurvetson has been a longtime friend and investor in the company, and for those of you who don't know him, he's a Silicon Valley investor who's probably the smartest VC that I know of, and certainly the one that's the most attuned to technological trends. He's on the board of SpaceX, Tesla, Synthetic Genomics, which is Craig Venter's company that's trying to build artificial life, and D-Wave, and that's it. And this is his particularly poetic way of framing the difference between the machines we build and conventional computers. This is what they look like. There are two of them. These are from our lab in Burnaby in British Columbia. From the outside, they look like giant black monoliths, big metal boxes, about 10 feet on a side, 12 feet tall. And they are powered, they have a fridge inside them, a refrigerator that cools these chips to almost absolute zero. Just a wisp, a fraction of a degree above absolute zero. Hundreds of times colder than interstellar space. Amongst the coldest and most isolated and extreme conditions that humans have ever been able to engineer. These fridges, interestingly enough, which are called pulse tube dilution refrigerators, have a thing called a pulse tube, which emits a sound roughly once per second, which sounds eerily like a heartbeat. So if you have the opportunity to stand next to one of these machines, it is an awe-inspiring thing, at least for me. It feels like an altar to an alien god. They really are impressive machines. At the heart of this big box is a tiny chip about the size of your thumbnail. And on this chip resides all of the wonder and magic that makes this thing go. I'm not going to describe in any mathematical detail how it all works, but let me give you an analogy. In quantum mechanics, there's this concept that a thing can exist in two states which are mutually exclusive at the same time, quote unquote. And I'm using those words because the English language was developed before we had concepts to describe what these things actually are doing. But I'm going to give you a roundabout way of understanding this. Imagine that there really are parallel universes out there, and now imagine you have two that are exactly identical in every respect, all the way out to the horizon as far as we can see, down to the last little atomic detail of every single thing, with only one difference. And that's the value of a little thing called a qubit on this chip, which is a contraction of quantum bit. And that qubit is very much like a bit or a transistor in a conventional computer. It has two distinct physical states, which we call 0 and 1 for bit. In a conventional computer, these are mutually exclusive. That device is either one or the other, and never anything else. In a quantum computer, that device can be in this strange situation where these two parallel universes have a nexus a point in space where they overlap. And when you increase the number of these devices, every time you add one of these qubits, you double the number of these parallel universes that you have access to, until such time when you get to a chip like this, which is about 500 of these bits, you have something like 2 to the 500th power of these guys living in that chip. So the way I think about it is that the shadows of these parallel worlds overlap with ours. And if we're smart enough, we can dive into them and grab their resources and pull them back into ours to make an effect in our world. Now, this may sound very odd to you and bizarre, and in fact, I am using language that a normal theoretical physicist probably wouldn't use, but this is, what I'm telling you is absolutely correct and in line with the way that these things actually work. We've been doing this for some time now, and in fact, we have our own version of Moore's Law. The doubling of the number of these qubits on the chip has happened once a year for the past 9 years. So for the last 9 years, every year the number of these qubit devices has doubled, and it will continue to do so. As a point of reference in terms of how fast these things are, in one generation of chip, the one from the system that was installed at USC to the one that Google and NASA have now, the speed of the device went up by almost 500,000. This is the kind of progress that you're going to see with these types of machines going forward. And 500,000 sounds like an abstract number, but I put up a little mental comparison here to see what 5,000 really means. 500,000 is a big number when it comes to speed. All right, so now I'm getting into the last part of my talk where I'm going to make some predictions, some dangerous predictions. So predictions are very dangerous for a variety of reasons. Often they're wrong, which is one. But I think they're important because predictions somehow are our internal desires made manifest. Predictions are about what we want to happen, maybe not what will happen. And I'm going to make 3 predictions, and all of them are dangerous in the sense that they're very unlikely to happen, maybe, but I think that there's a very good chance that they may. As an aside, I just wanted to say that at least in the Valley, Silicon Valley, and maybe in the United States in general, there's a very deep feeling of unease about the way technology has been developing. Because we have all of these vast array of very smart people, and what they're doing is crap. They're building things that cannot last. They're building things that are not important. This is a little bit of a controversial point of view, but I believe it. But I think that the reason for this is it's low-hanging fruit. Computers haven't been around for a long time. And I think that what's going to happen is that as people get more comfortable with computers, the attention will turn from the Twitters and the Facebooks to very important things. So here's my first prediction. I'm going to predict that by 5 years, NASA will have found an Earth-like planet with Earth-like atmosphere and water on it, and serious people will start discussing how we get there. And by the way, they're going to use one of our machines to help do this. So that's my first prediction. My second prediction is that this business of parallel universes is going to turn out to be very important. This picture that I've got under here is what's called a gravitational lens. When Einstein proposed his general theory of relativity, it came with a bunch of experiments that you could use to test it. And one of them was that if there was a point of light very far away and a galaxy in the middle, that galaxy should bend the light and you should see a ring. And this was eventually observed. And I think what's going to happen is somebody is going to come up with an experiment to test this reality of these things. And we're going to be able to do so. My third prediction that I'm going to end on is the most important of all. I believe that humanity is on the cusp of the most important technological, societal revolution that's ever occurred. And that's when we got to the point where the machines that we build outpace us in every respect. I don't mean that they're better calculators. I don't mean that they're better at searching. I mean everything. And I think that we're very close. And my prediction is that within 15 years, we will have machines that outpace humans in everything. Thank you very much.
Yeah, the Mandela effect, as most people have seen or experienced or heard about, are the changes to things in popular culture as well as in the Bible. I call it the Mandela portal because that goes to really the source of the effects. Where are these effects coming from? Specifically, they're coming from quantum portals that are being opened by the D-Wave computer. Now, the video that's linked in there, and I've got some quotes that I've written on my Urgent Discoveries page, are the Chief Technology Officer from D-Wave, Gordy Rose. So I'm not speaking out of turn. I'm simply citing what D-Wave is talking about. They are talking about parallel universes. They are talking about opening portals at the quantum level. In fact, that is at the heart of how the quantum computer operates in the quantum world. It operates interdimensionally. They use a programming process called combinatorial optimization, which means they take all known possible solutions and they take those in a combination and they program that through an interface, through the computer, utilizing quantum tunneling, and I have that on the page as well. I explain quantum tunneling. But in short, they are inserting a question with the possible solutions into another dimension, actually thousands of dimensions. And from those dimensions, they're extracting the solution or the answer. What they're extracting when they open these portals, we are seeing manifest as these changes known as Mandela effects. They are coming through the Mandela portals, as I call them. Well, I'm in agreement with you insofar as the changes because I have multiple copies of Bible, and in some of those copies, the words are different. They are changed from my recollection of them.
Right.
However, what I will sidestep and say is don't focus on whether the changes are real or not, just like you mentioned at the top of the show,
That's
Schrodinger's cat.
Bingo. Right.
We open the box to look at the cause and effect. It isn't whether there's a cat in the box and whether the cat's alive or dead. It's not the issue, whether the words have been changed or not. The bigger issue is we're being played.
That's it.
What I mean by that, there's a grander psychological operation at play here, and we'll get into that in more detail. But the point is, we are being observed. We're rats in a maze. This is a process of observing the pebble in the pond. If I claim to have changed the Scripture, what will be the reaction of people that become aware of that supposed change? Whether the change took place or not, if I put out into the public consciousness the perception of a change, how does that play out in terms of human behavior? This is the modeling of human behavior. This is the building of algorithms for the self-learning, the self-teaching of the artificially intelligent, sentient computer built by D-Wave. They have one model, the 2048, came out last year, and now the 4096. Both of these are sentient. Both of them are artificially intelligent, self-learning, and they need algorithms to learn. They are building algorithms of how people around the world respond to inputs into our reality. This Mandela effect through the portals is just the tip of the iceberg. There are thousands of changes that have been occurring to our reality caused by the accessing of this computer to thousands of interdimensional portals. And I'll back that up with some quotes from Gordy Rose from D-Wave.
All right.
People can go to my site and look at them. If you'll scroll down, and those that perhaps are following along at my website, scroll down to the very bottom where it says Inside PsyOps. And we'll come back to Gordy Rose and some of the quotes from the video in a moment. But I think it's germane to what you're talking about here, because I really think in the bigger picture, if we understand not only the psychological operation of behavioral modeling relative to the Mandela effects, but let's go to something even bigger. And you may have run into this. You had your promo going about Stained by Blood, and I will definitely get a copy of that. But you mentioned in the promo mind control, and that's really what we're talking about here. And there's a program, and there's 2 links on my website. There's a program called the Sentient World Simulation. That's SWS. This is the program, this is the system that is employed, and this comes right out of Purdue University, and it's tied in with D-Wave. This is the system that was involved with Jade Helm. So when people talk about, well, there was an artificially intelligent computer, a sentient computer that was involved, this is the system that computer employed to look at how people responded to inputs into their environment. They call it granular. There's a macro-granular effect and a fine-grained effect, which is personal and individual. The point is that within a computer, a sentient computer, they're creating a copy of our world, a mirror. And again, it sounds like science fiction, but this has been running since 2006, and it's run by Department of Defense, NSA, etc. And this is a continual program. It's running 24/7, and it is a simulation of our world in which they're able to put in certain types of stimuli and then run it through and crunch the numbers to predict the future behavior of people. This goes right back to one of the foundational goals for building the D-Wave computers. And I'll give you a very quick example of that. It was for predicting the stock markets and the commodity markets for the purpose of profiting from it. I mean, it wasn't necessarily that they wanted to dominate the trading markets, but it was a proof of concept to see if they were on the right track with the development of this computer system. The whole point here of the SWS, the Sentient World Simulation, is exactly what I said. It is to create a mirror of our world, and then within the world, there are over 7 billion people. They represent each person on the planet as a node, and they replace that node and the name of that node, that person's name, with an avatar, and they call that an avatar agent. They track the behavior, but they also predict the behavior of each one of those avatars. So they can affect the world economically, they can do it militarily, right down the line. Any aspect of our world, they can, in the computer version, predict the outcome and the behavior of people, and then bring that into our, if you want to call it our analog world, bring those cause and effects, that plan, that strategy and tactics back into our world and implement them. That was one of the reasons for Jade Helm. Let's think about it in terms of chess.
Uh-huh.
If you don't understand the game of chess, if you don't even realize there's a board and pieces on the board, you can't even begin to understand the game. What I'm hoping to do here is to say, here's the name of the game, and here's the board, and here are the pieces. The name of the game is SWS, sentient, which means self-aware. That's the computer. World simulation, simulating our world, a mirror. And the pieces on it, one of the big components is the D-Wave computer, which is tied into CERN, which both have the same goal of opening interdimensional gateways. D-Wave does it on a continual basis with their small portals that only last for picoseconds, all the way to the macro scale with the Large Hadron Collider and the Awake Accelerator, the VHEEP, where they're going to open a macro portal. So we're talking about the same thing, the same game, the same chessboard. Maybe I can put it in a more tangible description. when we think about using a search engine, if we use Google and we put in keywords and phrases, that's a linear search. That's just kind of straight line thinking, point A to point B. And that's a very pedestrian way of looking at information, at data. What the SWS does is what I call a spherical search. Rather than straight line, it's a 360-degree look at information. It looks at the context, the semantics of that, the meaning of that data, and it looks at the sources of it and the time relevance of that data. What I mean is exactly what you said, three-dimensional chess. We're talking about a system that looks at information rather than in a linear fashion, cause and effect. It's looking at it three-dimensionally, spherically, so that it sees all permutations, all possible causes and effects. When you insert a stimuli is a simple way of me describing what they're doing. The significance has to do with their relationship to the number of bits that it takes to create and crack a code, as I said earlier.
Right.
So really, these are coding machines. These quantum computers are really crunching numbers as a deciphering machine, kind of like, what was the German cipher machine? It is. It's really a coding system. The numbers aren't necessarily germane to us in our everyday experience.
Okay.
They only are if you're looking at, how the machine operates to break codes. But it does have another relevance, and that is to the number of dimensions. And I think that's perhaps where you're going with your question. The number of parallel universes, as Geordie Rose calls them in his discussion. Again, it's in the video that I have here, but let's use that to segue right into some of the quotes that I have on my website,
sure.
Geordie. Let's start with at 12:14 mark in the video. He talks about how the machine is cooled, and they use what are known as pulse tube dilation refrigerators. Again, a crossover to CERN. CERN are superconducting magnets that are cooled to temperatures lower, almost to absolute zero, colder than outer space. Even Geordie Rose says that their qubits, their computer is cooled in a similar fashion to 100 times colder than interstellar space, as he calls it. But he said these pulse tube dilation refrigerators, when you stand next to the black cube enclosure of the computer, it sounds eerily like a heartbeat because it beats once per minute. Now, a few moments later, he says, when you're standing next to this and listening to the heartbeat, it feels like an altar to an alien god. Now, I ask you, what scientist, what computer nerd, if you will, ever uses an analogy of an alien god?
Pick up from here.
Yeah, I think when we hear someone who is addressing an audience of scientists and they start venturing into the world of an alien god, it begins to trigger in my mind thoughts of Tesla and others that have openly stated that they were communing and channeling from the other side information and technology to advance, mankind. And what we talked about earlier, you brought up, the forbidden knowledge from the fallen angels. This is what we're talking about. I think if you look at his statement about an alien god and really unfold that, I really believe what he's saying is that we're getting information through these portals, these parallel universes that he speaks of, and I'll give you a number in a moment, that they know full well that they're channeling information from aliens. Now, you can define aliens as, little grays or whatever you want, but in my context, and I think you share this with me, these are evil, demonic forces, entities, spirits, whatever you want to call it, but it's no good. They're not talking to God. They're talking to false gods, and that can't be good for us. And yet that's what they're openly telling us when they say it feels like an altar to an alien god. Why use the word alter? I'll throw that out at you. I mean,
Joe?
look at the black cube, okay?
Yeah.
It's housed in a black cube. We've seen the black cube in occult societies, the Illuminati, all the way along. You see it in, the Muslim world. You see it at Mecca. You see even the references to Saturn, which is also Satan, and the black cube within that, and the black cube at the northern pole is represented by, a hexagon. So we're talking about them praying to whoever it is they're communing with on the other side.
Continue.
Because, we're talking about pure science, and now we're stepping over into the world of the spiritual. And I have said many times, even on your shows, I've said you cannot separate the physical world from the spiritual. They're both interconnected. It's how you relate to those, how you communicate with those, and what your belief system is that's important. But let's move a little bit further along in the quotes. He talks about parallel universes. Again, we're talking about interdimensional portals and gateways that they're opening using this computer, using qubit. He says that the value of a qubit is the only thing different in a parallel universe. What that means is when they're inserting information through their qubits into a parallel universe, they're changing that universe. They're modifying it. They say that to quote him, he says, parallel universes have a nexus. And this is what I claim as the starting point. The nexus is the starting point for the Mandela effect. This is where the crossovers, the interconnections of parallel universes take place. Another quote, he says, and when you increase the number of these devices, every time you add one of these qubits, you double the number of parallel universes that you access until such time you get a chip like this. And he's pointing to, in the video, the Model 512. He says, which is about 500 of these bits. Again, we're talking about bits, we're talking about coding, we're talking about qubits. They all are the same thing. He says that there are something like 2 to the 500th power of these guys living in that chip. In other words, what he's saying is 2 to the 500th power parallel universes that they're accessing using this computer. Now, that's only the 512 model. I'm going to stop here in a second. We're going to go to the higher numbers in just a second. When they insert their questions, their combinatorial optimization problem into another universe, they're affecting it. They're changing that by extracting from it what I'm going to get to in a second.
Okay.
He says extracting resources from. They're affecting those other universes the same way as when we receive that information from that universe. Yeah, I don't have an answer as to what they look like. I can only surmise that they are different than ours, and different because they are forbidden to us, and that we are not supposed to be accessing these parallel universes. It's been forbidden all the way back to the Tower of Babel, as we said before, using information that we're not supposed to be privy to. A couple of more quotes that I'd like to highlight for us. And at the 1450 mark, he says, the shadow of these parallel worlds overlap with ours. And if we are smart enough, we can dive into them and grab their resources and pull them back into ours to make an effect in our world. So, you're talking about grabbing resources and pulling it into, there's a cause and effect going on here. If we're extracting resources from another dimension, we are affecting that dimension. And if we're pulling those resources, and I call them, at this point, solutions to problems, then it is going to affect our dimension. Now, if you get further into talking about resources, we step over again to the example of one of those cause and effects being the Mandela portals, the Mandela effects. Those are things that are coming from, those changes are coming from other dimensions, and they are having the effects that you and I are discussing tonight. on the general population in the form of that psychological operation, those algorithms. One of the interesting things is, one of the questions that is being posed into these other dimensions is, what will make the biggest impact on the human psyche? What pebbles should we pull out as resources and throw into the pond of this analog environment here, and what will cause the biggest ripple effect that are obvious that we can then generate our initial elementary algorithms as to tracking human behavior, that we can then progress to more complex algorithms and more finely, what they call a granular level, more finely predict individual behavior at that individual level. So to encapsulate that, they are pulling back answers from other dimensions of what pebbles should we throw in the pond to cause what effect. In the early stages with D-Wave, they were actually extracting, along with solutions, they were getting back 110% more energy into this dimension than what they were sending into the other dimensions. So it's not just digital solutions. It's actual energy that is coming in the form of resources into our world. Now, you won't see that talked about with D-Wave anymore. This goes back to 2008, I believe, is when I read this, coming right out of their own literature. And that just gives you an idea of how I do my research. I always go back into history, because historically they were not as concerned about covering up their future goals. What I'm seeing now is the playing out of what they were predicting and what they were setting up as goals and objectives historically. And I look at the historical documents, their actual published documents, and then take those forward to the present time and go, bingo. They've achieved what they wanted, what they set out to achieve.
So
they're pulling resources out of other dimensions, and that's the mechanism of the computer. When we talk about operating in the quantum realm, we're talking about working interdimensionally. And what they're using is called, as a mechanism, is quantum tunneling. I won't spend a lot of time on that. It's on my website on this page that we're going through. But I want to step over just sideways a little bit back to the game. Because in particle physics research, they use a statistical system of analysis, of number crunching, called the Monte Carlo method. Basically, the Monte Carlo method is what they use to predict what particles will result from these massive collisions within the colliders. They also are using the Monte Carlo method psychologically to predict when we throw a pebble in the pond, a pebble that we get from another dimension, as a suggested stimuli to put into our matrix, if you will. They use the Monte Carlo method to predict human reactions, human behavior to that stimulus. So on my webpage there, I have a photograph from CERN of a physicist, and he's seated in his office, and he has two cards. One says Bond, number 1, and the other one says Mandela. Now, if you translate this evidence, these hints, it means that we're going to use a game called the Mandela effect on people, and we're going to utilize the Monte Carlo method, okay, which is like a card game. Do you remember the name of the Bond movie that involved the card game? It's affecting our universe. That Bond reference in the photograph is Casino Royale, which crosses over to Monte Carlo, which then is the Mandela effect as a psychological operation that is being played on us. And there's your crossover back to CERN. It's not just about colliding particles. It's about manipulating this environment, this dimension. CERN not only wants to open the portal, but they want to terraform. And you've heard me say this on your show before. They want to terraform this environment, this dimension. And specifically, I talked before about terraforming the planet, that the magnets of the collider were causing earthquakes and volcanic activity and changes to Earth's magnetosphere, taking down our shields.
Yep.
All of that stuff, but also dimensional changes. Look at civil strife in this country and around the world, but focusing on our country for a moment, the U.S., because we do have worldwide listeners. In the U.S., you see the civil strife, not only just in the political arena between, candidates, but we see it in our cities. And you opened the show talking about that. And that's why I say this is relevant to today and to exactly to tomorrow, the very next day. I'm not talking about distant future. The game is to create the civil strife. That civil strife is a psychological operation, no different than the Mandela effect. We are being played. They are inciting riots. They are inciting the black-white conflict. They are inciting all of this because they want to, as you well know, let's talk about Georgia Guidestones. I mean, I'm jumping around here, but they want to reduce the world's population down to 500 million people and create a serf class of slaves to serve the elite. Now, this isn't, conspiracy theory. This is, Agenda 21. You can go down the list of the things that we've seen in written publications that specifically cite how they want to institute this one world government, get rid of national and individual sovereignty, and have a one world leader. So set up the strife so people will then say, who's the answer? Who can we turn to as the leader with all the answers? That's the game. Well, I really would encourage people to, do some of their own research. One of the things that I really, let's say, preach, besides asking and pleading for people, to turn to God, turn to Jesus Christ, become imparted by the Holy Spirit to give you the eyes and the ears to see and to hear, because that's really the only way. The only way you're going to really wrap your head around the stuff that we're talking about tonight and really see the game for what it is to have those glasses that are given to you by the Holy Spirit, to be able to look through those lenses and see things clearly. We often hear about waking people up. Well, it's not just waking up. You open your eyes, but if you can't see clearly, it doesn't matter that you're awake. You need to have the glasses on that are provided by the Holy Spirit, and that gives you the clarity, and it takes away that deception. And then you can see the chessboard. You can see the 3 dimensions of the chessboard instead of just 2. Your perception changes. I'm nobody special. I really am not. And I appreciate you saying some nice things about me, but this is about Jesus Christ and the power that He imparts on you. And if you want to see the game, that's the direction to go and get His glasses made by Jesus Christ. I would like to maybe share another, right off my page, another quote, and that is not my own. We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false. And that's from the former CIA director, William Casey. Now, if you break that down into the ilk of the people that you're speaking of, they purposefully, for years, have been putting out a disinformation psychological operations program on the United States and the world at large. And we have the technology now to affect the entire planet. Give you another number. The quantum computer Model 512, and we've moved on from that to newer models. But even at the 512 level, D-Wave was citing a number that said that the computer had the equivalent processing power of 7 billion human brains. Now, appreciate the fact that a human brain processes on a continual basis over 1 petaflop of information. We can't even really acknowledge or wrap our own heads or our own minds around the capabilities of these computers, certainly not the 4096. So what I'm trying to do is provide some context to saying, because we don't really understand the capabilities of these computers, because we're not privy to that information, we have to understand the implications that you and I, the 3 of us, are talking about, the psychological operation that's going on, the manipulation of people, of the masses, and the predictive modeling of their behavior and their reactions is real. The opening of portals is real. This computer already is doing that. Therefore, the opening of a macro-scale portal utilizing the LHC, that's real. The technology exists, technology that is as much as 50 years in advance of what we are even aware of. So when we begin to think bigger, as you said at the beginning of the opening of the show, we need to open our minds up, and we need to think bigger, we need to imagine bigger, sort of that trite phrase of thinking outside the box. Well, quite literally, that's where you need to take your mind, because the fantastic is no longer in that realm of fantastic or fantasy. The technology exists today to do the things that only we could dream about years ago. So we have moved into the realm of the unbelievable, but it is becoming real with the advent of these computers, and that is today. And again, I don't want to slam the people at D-Wave. They're probably, they're human beings, just like us, but they're being deceived. They're being led down the garden path. So it's unfortunate that they're going that direction, because all of this technology, as you can well imagine, can be used for the better good. It could be used for curing all of the world's, ills and problems, but it's been taken the other direction. So I'm going to stop
and let you continue.
Well, let's put another number out there at the end of this page that we've been following down through today, the number of dimensions. Now, Gordy Rose, when he talked about the Model 512, he cited 2 to the 500th power. Well, the model number I'm citing, which is the 4096, that's 4,096 qubits. That literally provides them access to billions of parallel dimensions. We're talking about 2 to the 4,000th and greater power, magnitudes of power. When we talk about magnitudes, that's 3 zeros, inner parentheses, multiplied 4,000 times in a string of those zeros. Again, numbers we might also just talk about infinite. And you mentioned that. You brought that up earlier. Can we not even just, relegate it to the realm of, infinite dimensions that are being accessed? And I agree with that. I think that's a more tangible way of looking at this. To what end? Well, that's the big question. But I think if we turn to the book of Revelation, we see, to what end is spelled out pretty clearly. But again, getting back to the specific of what is being done here scientifically, we are talking about essentially a computer system coupled with particle accelerators that are opening portals. And I keep repeating that, but it's important that people realize this is tangible. This is not science fiction. They really are today, and have been since 2008, accessing other dimensions. We really don't know what effect that has had on our environment, on our own dimension, because it's happening under the surface. It's happening in intangible and hidden ways. But let's get into more of the psychological operation in terms of mind control, because you, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in your Stained by Blood, are you not getting into that area as well? MK Ultra and that sort of thing? Yeah, the psychological operation, the MK Ultra history, but really what does it mean by psychological operations to groups of people, small groups, and targeted individuals? I think there's a case to be made that not only the Mandela effect, but what's coming through from other dimensions, and we're seeing as visible evidence in our dimension, is the civil strife. And civil strife that is being caused because targeted individuals and small targeted groups of people literally are having their minds altered. And this is done through directed microwave energy, a host of technologies, but in the electromagnetic spectrum, this is what's being done. There are the ability to place thoughts and voices in people's minds, the ability to actually direct someone remotely, to change their mental state, to put thoughts into their minds, and to cause them to take action. This is happening as part of the psychological operation. It is the physical manipulation of people's minds to cause them to behave in ways that the controllers want them to behave. That's what you're seeing playing out in the cities right now. Well, I think the tieback is actually a reverse. A lot of technology is developed in what I call proof-of-concept laboratories around the world. These are other synchrotrons and linear accelerators and other programs that then send their proof-of-concept results to CERN to be implemented on a larger scale. Prime example, again, is the Awake linear accelerator that was developed on small scales, different laboratories, and then sent to CERN for a larger application. Now, to reverse that process coming out of CERN, it's kind of like the space program spun off things like the ability to monitor remotely and transmit heartbeats from a paramedic unit. That's my background. So the monitoring of human vitals comes out of the space program as sort of the reverse technology that comes out of, what was done for astronauts. The same similar process occurs with CERN. Is CERN causing these psychological effects? Is there a warping of time, as people want to say? Are there quantum effects coming out of the magnets at CERN? No, none of that stuff is happening. What is happening is the employment of technology from CERN to be used to affect people. Now, you mentioned at the beginning of the show that CERN was the foundation, the founding point for the Internet. Well, there are other technologies, and I'm going to get specific here, other technologies derived out of CERN's experiments that do have an effect on people's minds, and that is scalar wave technology. That's directed microwaves that are crossed, the directed beams are crossed, causing a scalar or a perpendicular radiation effect onto people. And that's a targeting of people with directed energy. Those are DEWs, directed energy weapons. There are also kinetic energy weapons that come right out of CERN. Strangelets, again, the most powerful explosive in the known universe, is part of a weapons program coming out of CERN. When people talk about the fact that China wants to build a ring-based synchrotron like CERN, but 20 times, 30 times more powerful, that's a weapons program. That's for directed energy and kinetic energy weapons technology development. So to answer your question, coming out of CERN are energy programs to change the psychology and behavior of people. Yeah, that is a direct correlation, definitely.
Okay.
Because if you have the largest gathering of the most brilliant minds on the planet, if you have the most funding directed to one organization on the planet, if you have the largest, most powerful machine in recorded history in that location, which happens to be the site of the ancient Roman temple to the god Apollyon, the destroyer, which is theorized to be positioned over the abyss, the gateway to the abyss. And this technology is the key to opening that doorway, that gateway to the abyss. You have the occult influences as well as the technology derived from the research that is conducted using all of these resources that I just mentioned, all for the purpose of controlling the human population, reducing the population, terraforming the planet, creating a new race of beings, and a new environment for that new race of beings, all who will form one world government and follow one leader. Now, that's a mouthful, but that in a nutshell is what CERN is all about. Well, there are a lot of topics, and as you and I have shared in the past, we hit on quite a variety outside of CERN, but let's segue just a little bit away from CERN itself and talk about particle accelerators in general and why they were developed. And very quickly, very succinctly, the reason that particle accelerators were developed were for two things. One, obviously, for nuclear warhead development and the modeling in computers of the yield of nuclear warheads. That's what CERN was originally formed as an organization to do, and why most synchrotron particle accelerators around the world were built, was for weapons development, for nuclear warheads, and the modeling in the computer rather than the below-ground and atmospheric testing that was being done. Now, the other point, the part B to that, was for medical research and DNA research. I mentioned earlier that their goal is immortality, and I mentioned that the venture capital money going to Silicon Valley is all about defeating death. It is all about DNA research. A gentleman that you may want to research on your own, Dr. Craig Ventnor of the Human Longevity Institute in La Jolla, California. I'm not a fan of his because I don't care for his motivations, but he is the person who first sequenced human DNA. It happened to be his own DNA. Where this ties into synchrotron particle accelerators is that they generate what I said are synchrotron energies, gamma rays and X-rays. They produce high luminosity X-rays that they can use to look at DNA, to look at the proteins. And I'm going to make this very succinct. They are able now to go to the quantum level, arrange quantum particles in whatever sequence they want, create the elements, create the atoms and the molecules, and then the proteins, the four base chemicals, and then the proteins that make up human DNA. We've talked about chimera in the past from the Bible, the mixing of DNA, the reason for the flood. We are right back at that time. They are mixing DNA of humans and animals using what are called DNA sequencers. To sequence the DNA, using a software program, they will arrange the proteins into the sequence that they desire, and they will grow biological life forms according to their design using sequencers. There are people who will say that there are, junk DNA and dormant DNA. Well, all of the DNA is there for a reason. There's theories that perhaps there's DNA that is latent at the sleep that can be awakened, and we would ascend to a higher level. We would have the ability to see and think and, be able to, transmit thoughts and all of that sort of thing, and get into the whole New Age discussion. But be that as it may, God created us the way that we are created. For us to go in and resequence our DNA is an abomination, and it is nothing different than the scripture that refers to the fallen angels mating with the human females and creating chimera and giants. And, L.A. Marzulli and Steve Quayle and all those guys do a great job of explaining all of that. But in a nutshell, no, this is not something that we should be doing. And I want to underscore that with this. Many, many times, just like you related when you read D-Wave's website, they will, in the arena of DNA or quantum computers or even with CERN, they will overlay these things with all of the wonderful things that can happen, that we can cure all of the ills of the planet, and we can find solutions through science for all of the problems. That's what and I'm sorry, used car salesmen that are in the audience, but that's sort of the used car salesman pitch, as I call it. They're really trying to buffalo us. They're lying to us when they say, oh, we can cure cancer using a particle accelerator and resequencing DNA. We can get rid of all of these deformities and abnormalities in the human DNA by pulling things out and replacing it and resequencing. That's just to sell you a bill of goods. That's to get the masses to go along with the funding. Well, I'd like to kind of step back. We talked about DNA, and it's unfortunate that people are being sold the bill of goods to that. All of this wonderful advancement in science, not just DNA research, but the full spectrum of science. That somehow science has all of the solutions to the world's problems. And unfortunately, people are being manipulated through popular media, movies, video games, the news media itself. our politicians, pretty much anyone out there or any medium out there is trying to set up authority figures as ones that should not be questioned. You don't question the police officer. Well, certainly he's got the gun and badge and he's telling you, I want you to do something, you're going to follow him. But beyond that authority figure to the politicians, if you will, or to the scientists, that somehow these people who are held up as experts in their field, that somehow they have the correct answers and the correct directions for us. And it is our responsibility as the surf class, as I like to say, to blindly accept that and follow their directions. Now, I tend to be a contrarian by nature because I like to investigate and find things out on my own. My call to action to people, besides what I have said earlier about turning to Christ and turning to God, my call to action is to use your brain to be one who is contrarian and think critically, think strategically, do some critical analysis, quantitative analysis of your own. Question things, get on the computer, go down the rabbit holes, find out if I'm full of hot air. Go to the topics on my website and research them on your own. You'll find out for yourself whether what I'm saying is truthful or not. I think I've been proven to be correct on a number of topics I've brought up over the last 3 years, so I think I'm on good footing here when I say that. But critical analysis is a skill that's been weaned out of us in our school systems. Our education systems, we've heard, have been dumbing us down. And I'm really on my soapbox now, but the point here is that they don't teach you to think critically in school. They don't teach you to be contrarian in school. They want you to walk in lockstep and follow the authority figures and the, quote, experts, the priesthood of scientists, that they know it, they're better at it than we are, and therefore we are to just be the blind surf class.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're doing a digital augmentation of our environment.
Yeah.
That's the digital augmentation. Look at Pokemon Go. Look at examples like that. They are trying to get people to demand a digital world rather than an analog one. They're trying to get people to not to be attracted at first, to be enticed into this, and then to be comfortable with it, and then to enjoy that environment of digital augmentation, and then get to the point where they demand to stay in that digital world, in that matrix, if you will. It's for control. We talked about mind control using microwaves, but this is literally mind control. This is getting people immersed in that augmented version of reality so that they can be controlled. You lose that self-awareness, that sentient and individual sense of who you are. You lose the awareness that you're even being manipulated. That happens already in a real time in our analog environment. We're already being manipulated to the extent where we don't even realize that the heat of the boiling pot has been turned up and we're the frog, and all of a sudden we realize that we're being cooked. Well, by that point, it's too late. That's what's already going on. But this full immersion, you lose your sovereignty of thought. Your sovereignty of thought, your self-awareness. And what did God give us in terms of our ability to think? He gave us free will. That's what we lose in the digitally augmented reality that they want us to be fully immersed in. I can make it fairly short.
Okay.
There is a theory, if you will, or an old story that relates to the golden age of Kronos. Kronos used to be the timepiece, which was Saturn. The story goes that Saturn and Mars and Earth were linked up. In particular, Saturn and Earth were enveloped in a plasma envelope. It was essentially a purple haze as viewed by humans at that time from Earth. And there was no day, there was no night, there was perpetual daylight provided by Saturn. Saturn and the Earth were traveling through the cosmos and eventually electromagnetically through magnetic lines of force, not gravity. The Sun attracted and captured Saturn and Mars and forced it into its current orbital pathway. Now, very shortly, I mean, that's a short description of the golden age of Kronos. This is what the occult secret societies have been passing on for eons. Their worship of Saturn, because their goal is to return mankind, that new race of beings that they talk about, return to the golden age of Kronos. They want to reconnect electrically Saturn and the Earth, because during that time where this plasma envelope, which plasma is what scientists refer to as dark matter and dark energy, it's what Tesla referred to as the ether that comprises the supposed vacuum of the cosmos. Plasma exists throughout the universe. It's electrically conductive. You can connect planets electrically, creating what are known as Birkeland currents and what I call plasma conduits. The goal of CERN is not only to open a portal, but to electrically reconnect Earth and Saturn, achieving the goal of the secret societies to return to the golden age of Kronos. Well, I think the most pertinent is the game, that we are being gamed, and that there is a massive psychological operation underway planet-wide, and within that, subsets of psychological operations within countries and within groups of people and even down to the individual level. And that is what's really behind most of all of the wars and civil strife that we see going on and the economic effects of all of these going on, that these are cause and effects that are being done on purpose. These are directed. None of this is happening by chance. This is a very strategically plotted out process that is augmented by the quantum computers, and it is tied to CERN, both of which have the stated purpose of opening portals at the quantum level and at the macro level. So the endpoint to the psychological operation is the control of people, then the opening of the portal, and then the terraforming of the planet and creating a new race of beings within that new environment under one world leader, under one world government. And that's why science has been usurped, and science has been turned to the nefarious side, to the dark side. And that is why, in my opinion, science is not to be trusted. In years past, people have questioned the ability for a mark of the beast system to control everyone on the planet, to buy or sell. And yet, when you look at a computer that has the stated processing power equivalent to 7 billion human brains, and it accesses an infinite number of parallel universes and operates faster than anything that we can even imagine, the mark of the beast system becomes a tangible reality right now. Well, first it takes, because we have free will, a conscious decision on everyone's part to accept the mark of the beast, to make that choice. If you accept it, then it can be imparted on you remotely through microwave-directed energies, if you want to call it through Gwyn towers or whatever mechanism. But we already have within our bodies DNA that has been modified, that is laying dormant, that we have taken in from the environment through aerosolized spraying, chemtrails, through our foods, through the air we breathe, through the environment. We already have DNA modifiers in our body that are dormant, and they will be remotely triggered using microwaves. And that dormant DNA will then begin to modify our DNA and modify literally our brains to where, as I said before, we lose any awareness that we have even lost our sense of individuality. So this will be done by remote control, if you will, but we already have within our bodies the mechanisms for that mark of the beast. Well, right now, every single person on the planet is tracked. When we talk about, the mind control systems,
Right.
and I have all of the information, I've got all the data to back this up. This isn't, science fiction. The ability to monitor everyone's movements and every thought and decision already is being tracked. It is already being monitored. It comes down to the frequencies at which our individual brains operate at, the frequencies that our own individual bodies resonate at. Those individual frequencies are the mechanism for which we are being tracked. Once we express that decision that we want to accept the mark of the beast, that is made known to the sentient adiabatic quantum computer. The artificially intelligent computer will already know through that monitoring of our frequencies the decision that we have made, and therefore the triggering of our DNA will take place. But if we have accepted Christ and we have the Holy Spirit, we have the full armor of God, and we have the ability to say, no, I reject it, and my DNA physically is protected by the Holy Spirit. I think the only pathway, and Joe laid it out earlier, the only pathway really is to turn to Christ. Again, I don't want to come across as a preacher, but really the tangible, the practical, the actual what can I do. You can't get the pitchforks and the torches and go march off the CERN or go into the halls of government or go into the courtrooms and stop this. There's no way of stopping it. In fact, it's God's plan that CERN will be successful, as we've pointed out. What we can do individually is really the question. And individually, what we can do is turn to our Creator, thereby ensuring our immortality through Jesus Christ as our intercessor, as our Savior, who has paid the price for our individual souls. The question isn't so much about our physicality. It is more about our soul. That's what it comes down to, and that's what I would encourage people to focus on, is saving your soul.